Hiyo, it's me, Nicole Phoenix Star, and this is a Nick Star podcast. Well, I am coming to you as a mother of 26 years. My daughter Ruby had her birthday last weekend, and I have been a mother for as long as I haven't. I was 26 when I had her, so yeah, next year I would have been a mother in this lifetime for longer than I wasn't. These funny little kind of increments are fascinating and bring in a lot of inquiry. And I wrote myself a letter the day before her birthday on 8/8 Lion Gate and sealed it to open next year, which is an exercise I put my year-long group container through as well. And yeah, it's fascinating because there's going to be a lot of changes in our life next year. And I'm super curious to see what life will be in a year from now. It's really fascinating, the whole mothering piece. It is such an interesting piece for me. It's been very highlighted for a lot of my journey. I was born on Mother's Day, and I have really taken the whole mothering piece as a very profound module of evolution. I, for many years, found it kind of like a burden, especially when you are in those early days where everything feels like Groundhog Day, and you've got toddlers and you've just got so much physical attention that is required and so much doing. And then when I separated from my husband and became a co-parent and didn't have parenting, mothering duties full time, it was, quite an adjustment. And when they did come, it was just, really kind of clunky. And I remember life was super overwhelming the year before I moved to Bali. And I remember one really difficult time, and I was sitting on my balcony and I just was like, I just wish he would take them for 3 months so I can have some space to navigate the difficulties of all the things that were happening. And a few months later, I decided to move to Bali. And although the kids were coming originally at the 11th hour, they didn't. And I became a very part-time mum for 2 years, and it felt like the universe got the timeline incorrect. But, as I've mentioned before, it was one of the most potent, profound times of my life, having all that time and space available to me, which sent me on the most wildest trajectory of becoming a Hindu high priestess. Never saw that one coming. And then, the very big surprise, third child, and then the other two coming to live full time and having two teenagers and a toddler, full time, while trying to work and hustle and pay for everything that cost, as well as full-time breastfeeding. And there's just been so many random seasons. And like living in Indonesia, you get a very real example of what, kind of family dynamics and, the generational living and dynamics play out. And, for many years, how things probably until, you know, I would say the 40s, 50s, hundreds, thousands of years, that how things, were were played out. And it's so funny now. I always say the children in this day and age, you don't get much return on your investment. Whereas in the past, like, you put time and energy into your children because they were then going to become the primary, you know, adults. And there was never a question that you weren't going to be cared for as an adult, as a grandparent and all of that. And just those roles. And it's really funny. We put all this time and effort into our children now just to send them on the way with not a huge return of investment as we age and whatnot, as a general society. And it's a very real, true story. Um, because, I see in witnessing, like, when I was living in Indonesia, how families live in compounds and all the generations, unless you're a woman who gets married, you never leave. And, um, babies are cherished, like cherished, and they're given a lot of spaciousness to be who they are. And then they go through these rites of passage and they take on more responsibility. And, when they start working, a percentage of their wages goes back into the family unit to sustain the dwellings and buy the rice and pay for ceremonies and ensure that grandparents, are well cared for and sent off once they pass. And it's never questioned. And, that was kind of like the framework for the majority of society up until, 2 generations ago. It's fascinating. I find it fascinating. And I'm very aware of that. And I put a lot of time and effort into connection and all the things with my children. I have really close really, really close relationships with all of them in very different ways. And I don't know, children are all so different. And I think that that's a very common thing. We say, how did two siblings come out of the same gene pool and be so profoundly different? And I find that is, the rule. Siblings are all so different. And I know without any question, if there was anything to happen to me, that any of my children would just scoop me up and look after me and till I die. And not that that's been my intention, and that, like, that's just an aspect. And I've also used mothering very intentionally for my own evolution, to be able to not have any expectations of my children or wish them to change or be different, and really learning through them as primary relationships to accept them for who they are. And I really got that massively when Harley was a teenager, kind of trying to grow up through his childhood trauma and, just wishing his behaviors were different. And Ruby pointing out to me that all I was doing was wishing he was to be different and not accepting him for who he is. And although his behaviors weren't somewhat acceptable, taking it from the other side as opposed to just change, just behave better, just don't do that. She said, you're doing the very thing that you tell everyone and preach, which is acceptance, and you're not doing that. And I was like, oh my God. And I literally flipped it and spent a lot of time with him in conscious conversations and sessions and addressing where he was hurting and addressing, what patterns that he was stuck in and, accepting him for where he was at while doing the work and putting in a lot of time and effort and energy into that and using that, for my own awareness and my own growth and not kind of coming from conditioning and certainly not displaying, parental behaviors that I'd been exposed to and in that, as well, like absolute acceptance for my parents and them showing up the way they did because that's who they were from their conditioning and their upbringing and just simply being in gratitude. So yeah, it's such a fascinating piece, like I remember in my late 20s had spent my whole life wishing my mother was different. I wish she would behave in the way that I wanted her to, and I wish that she would treat me in a way that I had fabricated in my mind. And I remember one day saying, I wish she would just accept me for who I am. And it just literally smashed me in the face. And I was like, but you don't accept her for who she is. And it was a big game changer for me. I was like, how can she possibly accept me for who I am if I don't accept her for who she is? And, it's simply that fairy tale Disneyland idea that one has in their mind that causes suffering. And I don't know, that's such a wonderful example for all of life. If we accept people for where they're at, accept people for who they are, and not wish them to be any different. And, that doesn't mean being a doormat. That doesn't mean putting up with bad behaviors. That means I accept you for who you are and you and me being around you. It's not appropriate. And I don't need you to change because I've spent years wishing you would change, and that's on me. So, yeah, it's a very interesting place to navigate and work out what is an alignment for you. And it's something that, is really powerful in primary relationships, really powerful with parents, really powerful with siblings, and really powerful with children. They are your primary relationships, and they have shared DNA and, the whole lineage stuff and all of that. Like, they're really powerful places to to do the work and to look at all of those dynamics as modules and work to be done. And, the only person that needs to take responsibility is the self. So, yeah, I've used mothering as a beautiful, intentional, purposeful place of growth. And, like the dynamic I have with my daughter and with my adult son and my teenager, so incredibly different. And the reality is that they have all had different experiences of me as a mother. So, for them to compare their experience of their mum is going to be very different as well. It's another thing that so many people say I didn't have a good example of, a parent or whatever. And so I didn't know how to do it. I find that kind of such a odd thing to say because, although there is an understanding in that, at the end of the day, it's taking personal responsibility of your own behaviors and your own, way that you do your parental dance and any other, kind of dance in any dynamic relationship. And it's about showing up to each child for where they're at and being able to relate from that place. It's so funny. Like Ruby and Harley are both fire signs and they've got their complete different fiery aspects to them, and Leo's an air sign, and he's just a whole other different dynamic. And the mother that Ruby and Harley got is a completely different mother than Leo got. Completely different. And it's interesting listening to them talk and stuff and kind of recognizing as well, like we remember more about the times than kids do when they were 10. Like if you think of your own self at 10, you don't remember a lot. And obviously there may be, big things or traumatic things or exciting things that you may remember, but just the general day to day. And, I know how much I've grown and changed, which has been something I've been aspiring my whole life. And as the version of me has shifted and changed, as has their mother. And I really find that a beautiful thing to kind of sit with. And these are the ripple effects that happen from, taking that radical responsibility for thyself and really kind of not living that Groundhog Day and living in contentment and same year in, year out and all that. It it may feel, I don't know, the words are kind of spinning around in my head right now about it's very interesting, the idea of being content and comfortable and how that's a goal to have. And for me, that freaks me out. It makes me feel like it's not a place of evolution, and how the contraction and all of the modules grow us, and you get to a point where, they may be difficult, but they don't need to be in suffering, and we can navigate all the highs and lows from that place of neutrality and feel them to the depths of the intensity without being, spun out into loops of suffering, and that is the grand aspirational goal. So, yeah, there's been a lot of inquiry over the last few days around this, um, mothering module, and how incredibly grateful I am for it. There was a time many years ago where I just really thought that if I had have not had children, it would have been better. It would have been easier. It wouldn't have been so hard. And, absolutely is truth to part of that. Certainly would have a lot more money. But that's not what happened, and that was not what I signed up for. And so there was a time when I was in extreme accelerated evolutionary module, and during 6 months when I spent in a cave with Swami during my tantric trainings, and he said to me, you can step out of mainstream life right now and, basically live a monastic life, and, live in a cave and get your food brought to you and just sit and take the high road of only focusing on meditation and evolution and whatnot. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds like a dream. Like, to not have any responsibility, to not have to navigate all this intensity and difficultness and so much suffering in my life. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And I like, the idea appealed to me outrageously. And I went through the guilt and you can't think that. And it appealed to me so much. And I actually was 99% sure I was going to do it. And I sat, and I sat with the intentionality of finding the true path, and without my noise, without thoughts, without anything. And the answer I got was no. Your greatest evolution is through mothering. I was like, far out. So not long after that, I hired a house for 2 weeks in Australia for the school holidays and got Ruby and Harley. That was about 4 months. No. 2 months before I fell pregnant with Leo. And I sat them down. I told them the whole process, that I had got the opportunity to step away from this, and I really thought I was going to do it. And they just sat and listened. They didn't freak out or anything. And I explained to them very clearly that means that I would never see them again, and, be kind of like, your mum died, but not because you would understand that. And they just listened. And I said, but I'm not. And I told them I wanted to, but I'm not. I'm staying here. I'm not going anywhere. And this is where we grow together. And it was a really beautiful conversation. And then Harley said, "Can we eat marshmallows now?" I said, "Yeah." I didn't know he was 11 or 12, around Leo's age. And then I flew to Thailand, went and spent 2 weeks in a tantric ashram, and then went to Wales, and much to my surprise, on my 40th birthday, Leo was conceived in Merlin's Forest. And the rest is history. Yeah. So it was so crazy having my 3 children under the same roof last week, because Harley came over, which happened to be in Ruby's birthday week. And yeah, we haven't been like this for a really long time. It was trippy and beautiful and amazing, and we took some photos. We had to do a recreation of last time Harley, Ruby and I were the same height. Now that Leo, Ruby and I are the same height. Actually, Leo is a tiny bit taller. I am now officially the shortest person in my family of me and my 3 children. Yeah. It's funny seeing them. They're so different. They've all got such different relationships with each other. Their closest relationship is with me, each and individually, which is interesting. But we've also had very different chunks of times together. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I got today. Much love. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you all so very, very, very much. Please feel free to share this with anyone that you may feel be of benefit. Much love.